Hi everyone, happy new year. This is Amie. If you're new to my channel, hello, and if you're back after having seen some of my videos before, welcome back. I don't know if I said happy new year. Did I say happy new year? I don't know. Anyways, happy new year. I'm so excited to do this video because I attempted to do one last year and I was very shy and lost steam and hated the video. A video like this would have been the first one that I ever put on YouTube, and I just lost steam and got very shy and decided not to do it. So this year I'm very excited to do a video about my favorite books that I read in 2025. Everybody's doing them and I have been watching every video I come across because I love them so much and I love to see people wrap their year up and review their reading year. So let's do my first one, which is crazy. I can't believe it's almost been a year since. I have to say, looking at my favorite books of 2025, you're going to see a lot of the same authors making the list because 2025 was the year that I really threw myself into reading a lot of romance, especially sports romance, and books that featured in series. So I found that my favorite books have really been from certain series. So if you see a repetition of authors, I'm sorry, but it is what it is. They were my favorites. This video is going to be in no particular order because I find in general it's very hard for me to pick a favorite, but when I then have to number them like 1 to 10 or 10 to 1 or whatever it is, I get even more nervous and more daunted. So I figured the best way to do this would be just to randomly say them in hopes that it makes sense. So let's go. 2025 was the year that I discovered J.J. Mulder, and I proceeded to read every book that they have ever written because I was obsessed. You know, J.J. Mulder has a way of just creating the most beautiful characters. I don't think I've ever loved a collective group of characters the way that I love hers. So right now they have 2 different series and they're kind of all interconnected standalone and they all know each other in some way, shape or form. I really appreciated going through all the books and reading them all because I enjoyed all of them, although I like some more than others. And it was great to just read and bask myself in this world that they've created, because like even though their books are not perfect, there is just something so warm about the characters. I find that with J.J. Mulder's characters, I'm constantly rooting for them. Like you can't help but root for them. You can't help but love them. They just kind of sneak their way into your heart and you then start to question what life was even like before you discover that they existed, if that's even possible. This is a significant reading year for me because I discovered J.J. Mulder. I don't think very many authors have that effect on me. Right now, only 3 off the top of my head that I can think of. Reading a J.J. Mulder book feels like a privilege. That being said, the first of her series follows a group of friends. They are professional hockey players and they play for the same team. First on my list is Square to the Puck by J.J. Mulder, and it is the second book in her Offsides series. It follows, like I said, a group of friends, and this book follows Corwin and Nigel. So they're both professional hockey players. Nigel is actually, if I'm not mistaken, French-Canadian. So he's moved over to the States to play professional hockey. Corwin is American. And I think they all play in South Carolina, the South Carolina hockey team. A few years back, like about 10 years ago, they had a bit of a run-in in public and it didn't particularly go so well. And they hadn't spoken to each other until Nigel is transferred to the team that Corwin is at. And not only is Corwin a member of that team, but he's actually the captain. You have to speak to your captain. You have to interact with your captain. And Nigel feels absolutely terrible about the run-in. So when he moves to South Carolina, he really tries his best to talk to Corwin and make sure that they are able to clear the air. And he apologizes so profusely and he's like, I'm so sorry for how things went down. And they begin to make amends. This book really touched me because Corwin has a particularly difficult background. So his father was a professional hockey player as well. So he does have that hockey history in his family. And his father is pretty abusive. And so Corwin, he's very responsible. He's very sweet. He's very kind. But he still has this shadow looming above him. He can't do anything right in his father's eyes. His father is overly critical. His father is abusive. His father is actually just pretty terrible. And his mother is one of those people where she just allows this to happen. She doesn't call out her husband about the way that he does things. She isn't as abusive, but her silence and her complicity is also abusive, passively, I suppose. In his day-to-day life, he's managing okay. He lives a blameless life. He's a very responsible captain. He's the kind of person where like he cooks for everyone on the team and he's like if you can't go home for the holidays, come over to my house. He's like the mother hen of the friendship group. And so he's managing quite well looking at him from the outside and not particularly knowing him. And I think Nigel's arrival on the team really brings back all his feelings of inadequacy, because the reason why their run-in was so bad was in part because of, I believe, the trauma that Cohen is dealing with. And Cohen back then was 18, so he was still quite young, barely an adult. And all his insecurities and all his past trauma that made it so that he was unable to react the way that he should have reacted if he wasn't dealing with all those things. I think my favorite thing about this book is how the miscommunication that happened wasn't glossed over. It was very much addressed and dealt with, and there were proper apologies made, accountability. And I really like the fact that you could just tell that Nigel really cared about Cohen. He was like Cohen's biggest cheerleader. He was willing to take things at Cohen's pace, and he just really wanted Cohen in any way that he could get him, whether it ended up being romantic or not. He just was willing to put in the work and put in the time to make sure that what they had felt very kind and gradual and loving and supportive, and they did eventually get their happy ending. It's not a perfect book by any means, but I think it was quite lovely in the way that everything went down. It just made me feel so warm. When you're reading a book and the couple is dealing with so much, but there's also so much love at the heart of it. I especially love the friendships between Cohen and his team. He's very good friends with Troy, who is his teammate, and also Anthony as well, and they're very much his best friends and they look out for each other. And I've said this before, but JJ Mulder writes some of the most incredible friendships between men that I've ever seen. They're very playful with each other, they joke with one another, but they are such a great emotional support for each other. They are really there for each other whenever, and it's great to see, especially integrated with all their partners as well. The only thing I would say is I felt like Cohen's issues with his parents were not properly addressed, if anything, and the ending of it was a bit rushed, which is a problem that JJ Mulder, I found, has gotten better at. This is one of their very first books, so it's understandable that not everything would be perfect, and even if you are experienced, perfection is not particularly something that's possible for anyone really. But I think it's still a beautiful book, and I have read it several times. I just absolutely adored it, and Cohen and Nigel are such a sweet couple. If you've read this book, let me also know what you think, because I absolutely love it. My second favorite book this year was also from the Offside series, and that is book 3, and that follows Nico and Anthony, who they call Lawson a lot of the time. His first name is Anthony. Anthony is, like I said, Cohen's teammate and best friend, and Nico is actually the head coach for the South Carolina University's hockey team. So he coaches hockey now. He was a professional hockey player, but he unfortunately got into an accident that not only nearly claimed his life, but also severely impacted not only his mental health, but also his physical health. I don't want to go into details because I don't want to spoil it. But the reason why he sustained those injuries and got into that accident is extremely sad. It's heartbreaking, to be honest. When you first meet Nico, he's very gruff and he's very brief and he's not very nice, especially in comparison to Anthony's more sunshiny personality. You can tell that he's been vulnerable for so long, and so he's just not willing to open up as quick as somebody who hasn't been through any of those things, because he's lost so much control around his own life, and so there's a lot of fear of heartbreak, and he's in the closet as well, and I think that puts him in a very vulnerable place, so he's not particularly keen to open up to anyone. And eventually Anthony just wears him down because he needs help with training the guys, and Anthony volunteers. And so he's spending a lot of time not only with Nico, but also with the team, and the team absolutely adore him. Anthony's a professional hockey player, so to them, that's like a celebrity. And also the fact that he's actually coming out of his way to help the team for free. So Nico couldn't particularly say, oh, I don't want you to help my team, or you should go away, because that would be crazy. And so they start off like having a very sort of casual relationship, no strings attached, and obviously that goes out of the window when they start bonding emotionally and when they start helping each other with just basic life stuff as well. I just love the push and the pull between them. I loved the sort of contrast between their personalities, with Nico being so gruff and and Anthony being just open and gregarious and sweet and kind and boisterous. If you like Grumpy Sunshine, they're definitely the ones for you. I also love the discussions about vulnerability and homophobia and the cost, what that could mean for somebody's life. I loved this a bit more than I loved the second one. The thing about JJ Mulder is that you can see the improvement following each book, and this is obviously the third book in the series, so structurally I felt it was better than the second book. I feel like my only complaint was the fact that Anthony and Nico had a breakthrough at some point in their relationship, because I won't go into too many details, but basically Nico asked Anthony for help with something, and Anthony is obviously extremely happy because Nico, like I said, it's not very easy to get past his walls, and the fact that he was asking Anthony for this thing made him very happy. And they didn't show that, and I get that they showed other parts of caretaking, and if you've read the book you know what I'm talking about. I would have loved to see that particular scene where Anthony did what Nico asked him to do. I love Anthony's dynamic with the team. He's a very perceptive person, Anthony. Everybody looks at him like the jokester and things, but he has a very good read on people, and he is the kind of person that's always willing to see what lies beneath the surface. He doesn't really take what he sees at face value, and that's not only in relation to Nico but in relation to the team as well. Like, he was bringing different kinds of players out of their shells and encouraging them to bond so like they could see the overall good that they were doing. It's just a very sweet book, and I think the overall theme of the books that I've loved this year is just like sweet and tender and kind and loving. An additional note to Corwin's story with Nigel, I think one of my favorite things about it is when you read the entire series, and all of JJ Mulder's characters are usually very giving and very sweet and very loving, but I think in particular one of the reasons why Corwin's story stands out to me is that Corwin is an extremely giving person. He's always so willing to sacrifice for somebody else. And I think one of the reasons why his story stood out to me was because Nigel was prepared to do the same for him. His friends are quite loving as well, but I think in a romantic context, it was quite important for him to be with somebody who would go as far for him as he does for other people. And I think that's probably one of my favorite things about Corwin's story with Nigel, and why it's definitely one of my favorites without a doubt. And I'm curious, if you have read it, like, what do you think about that? The next book on my list is Save the Game, and this is also by JJ Mulder, and it is a part of the SCU Hockey, which is actually a kind of spin-off series. This one follows the guys on Coach Mackenzie, who is Nico's team. They are connected to the team because Nico is their coach, because they know Anthony, and because they know the other guys. When Nico needed help, especially training, the guys from the previous series would all come in and help them. So Save the Game follows Max and Luke. So Luke actually does not play hockey. He actually plays baseball, but he works at a diner, and one day there's this guy that comes in and he's immediately taken by Max. Max is very quiet, very withdrawn, seems to almost want to disappear and not be seen by people, and so he zeroes in on him and goes to connect, and then they become closer. Max is dealing with complex PTSD because he has just experienced what I think is one of the most traumatic things that can ever happen to you, with the additional layer of the fact that he was unconscious when it happened, and is just kind of trying to stay afloat / pick up the pieces, but is finding it particularly difficult because it's difficult to move on, as well as dealing with all the complicated emotions that come with having experienced this for yourself, and it being actively investigated and having so many unanswered questions. It takes a toll on somebody. This is while being a full-time student and also a hockey player. He's unable to sleep, he is unable to eat. Basically, his life is in a limbo, and he's so scared of everything and everyone apart from his best friend, who obviously is looking after him as well, and they're trying to manage as best they can. And so he meets Luke, who's also like this ray of sunshine, who is just so understanding, so loving, so kind, so patient. I think one of my favorite things about this book is the fact that it didn't shy away from the trauma. It didn't shy away from the quote-unquote unsexy parts of being with somebody who has been through something so utterly disgusting and so devastating. I think the overarching theme of this book is that even though something terrible has happened to you, it doesn't really make you a worthless person. It doesn't make you damaged goods. You know that expression, damaged goods, that boils my blood. It doesn't make you unworthy of love, of attention, of a good life, essentially. And I just really loved seeing them. I loved how patient Luke was. I think one of the best things about Max is despite this happening to him, he is still such a fundamentally good person. And he doesn't even come from the best background himself. He has quite emotionally distant family members as well. So he doesn't even have family to lean on in that way. He could have used it as an excuse to be like a terrible person, and he still never did. He was still such a good person. And he has the most amazing friends ever. Carter, who is from the book before this one, is one of his really good friends, along with Carter's boyfriend Zeke. And they have a friendship group that is amazing. Max also has an amazing best friend called Marcus, who also has his own book later down in the series. So even though he wasn't blessed with the best family, he has the most amazing friends. I love the fact that the events of what happened weren't ignored. They were properly addressed. They were depicted in a way that I felt was respectful. The only thing I would say about this book that pissed me off is that the way that Luke found out about what happened to Max was absolutely devastating. And it wasn't addressed, and it was an absolute violation of privacy. And I wish that the JJ Mulder had some consequences for that, because that is not even funny. First of all, it's such a private thing, and the fact that the people who handled it could be so blasé about telling other people who were not involved, only for them to go and tell, it was just, for me, I felt like that was a huge letdown. That said, it was so sweet and so kind. I absolutely loved it. Next up, another book by JJ Mulder, which I absolutely loved, was On the Edge. And this follows Vass and Atlas. This is also in the SCU hockey series, and this is actually book 3. Vass is a friend of Max's. Like I said, they're all on the same hockey team. I think Vass was more so Carter's friend, and then obviously when Carter befriended Max, they all became part of this friendship group with Carter and Zeke, who is Carter's partner. Vass is one of those characters I was extremely curious about. He featured a lot in Carter's book, which is book 1. He kind of featured in book 2 as well, and he's just such a kind person. Everybody loves him. He's the kind of person where, like, if you don't like Vass, something is wrong with you. He's not the problem in any way. He's so kind. He's originally from Germany, so he's actually in America as an international student, which is hard because it's one thing to like immigrate to another country for school, but it's especially difficult when you don't actually understand the language, which he didn't until he came. He's multilingual, but you can tell that he's timid about not messing up English. He has very like people-pleasing tendencies as well. So I was curious about how that would manifest in a relationship of his own, because I just thought he was so sweet. When it comes to JJ Mulder's characters, he's definitely in my top 5 because I just adore him the same way everybody does. It's like everybody loves him for a reason. He is the most lovable guy on the planet. And then he meets Atlas, who has the same classes as he does. Atlas is more so the roommate of another person who features in the series as well. Atlas is very rude and very touchy, and he has quite a difficult background of his own, and so now he's always trying to be left alone, and he's like, don't touch me. He's like a porcupine. He's like, touch me and I'll poke you. And so they really bond because Vass is incapable of ignoring people, and he's always trying to be friendly and always going out of his way to make sure that people are comfortable about him. And I think that also speaks to his people-pleasing nature, where he just can't stand when people don't like him. And so that's kind of the dynamic. Atlas constantly trying to push him away and Vass having absolutely none of it. I really loved how it tied back to the first series, because Vass applies to do like an internship with the kind of like admin side of the professional hockey team where all the guys play, and it was nice to see them make several appearances as well. And I loved how it just kind of started off as a friendship. Atlas was in a very, very difficult place mentally and emotionally, and I think it took for someone who just has just so much love to give, coming in and making him feel loved and accepted, and it eventually grew until they just couldn't stay away. It was just such a heartwarming book. The thing is that they're like character-driven books as opposed to plot-driven books, and I suppose if that's not something that appeals to you, you might find it quite difficult to like her books. But I love character-driven books, especially with romance. I find that I have to like the characters, or at the very least connect to them in some way for me to enjoy a book. With JJ Mulder's books, that's just basically that on steroids. The books focus primarily on the people and what they've been through. Vass is on the asexual spectrum, and I think it's the first time that I've ever read a book about a character on the asexual spectrum, and that was amazing to see, because I had just no kind of reference point as to what that feels like, what that looks like. what that means, especially in a relationship where one person is on the spectrum and the other one is not. And I think it was great because they found a balance that worked for them. It was good to see that kind of representation in a book, because I think one of the reasons why I read is to gain insight into people, and also just things that I don't understand, things that I don't have personal experience of. And I think this is what was so great about this book, is that I was just so captivated by, I suppose, the human experience and what that looks like from both of their perspectives for two different reasons. And it was great to see Atlas just embrace Vas. With a character like Vas being on the spectrum, I think there's a little part of my brain that was a little bit scared about how he would be treated based on this information about him. And so I loved that Atlas, despite being the most prickly man ever, was like, this is who you are and I accept who you are and I'm not trying to change who you are. I know that I can be difficult to like and be around, but this is not a part of you that you have to worry about me rejecting. And I thought it was so sweet. I actually think they were quite ideal. I can actually relate to Atlas's cynicism, lack of trust. It's not quite as deep-seated, but I could see, based on his background and his life story, why he would end up like that. And I think if I could see anybody struggling with it, it's probably from Atlas's POV, because he really does make Vas work for it. But I think also, on the other side, I think with Vas, it's important to him to be of service to people. You can tell that it is, I suppose, a foundational aspect of the person that he is, where a relationship like that, even though looking at it from the outside, it looks like it's not serving him, but then you read all the books and you have all the additional context and it's like, actually it is, because he gains a lot from giving. And obviously they do eventually get to an ideal place. And I think it was really sweet, because at the end of the day, I feel like they both got what they wanted out of a relationship, and that to me is the most important thing. The next book on my list is the last book in this SU hockey series, and it's called The Last Buzzer, and it follows Desmond and Jack. So Jack plays hockey on the team. He's close to Nate, who also is on the team, who is from a previous book as well. He featured quite heavily in Nate's book because they are best friends, and so this is his story. Desmond is actually originally American, but his family relocated to Australia when he was a child, so he kind of grew up Australian, if that makes any sense. And so when they moved back to America, he was quite sad because he loved Australia. So he went back to Australia and then continued to live there because it was far away from his parents, who he doesn't get along with. Also, he just loved it. And so unfortunately, his sister and her husband passed away in a car accident, and he has to return to the States because he has been named as his nephew's guardian, which is obviously devastating, because for one, he is dealing with the loss of his only sibling and his brother-in-law, but also now he has to take on the role of a guardian, which he obviously wasn't prepared for, because who could be prepared for something like that? But now he also has to deal with his parents, who are homophobic and abusive, and now they're fighting him over guardianship of his nephew, even though it was pretty set in stone with his sister. But they want to contest the decision because they don't feel like Desmond is a good influence because he's gay. They don't feel as if he's good enough to look after their grandson, even though his sister was perfectly okay with this. And they're just horrific people. So on top of all his grief and the adjustment of moving countries and coming back and being essentially a dad now, he has to deal with his annoying parents and then the additional burden of paying lawyers to keep his nephew. And so he comes back to the States and he becomes the assistant hockey coach for the college hockey team. So that's where he meets Jack. One of the things I really loved about this book is that they take the dynamic seriously, because I don't really enjoy that whole teacher-student thing. So I like the fact that the steps that they took before they got into any kind of romantic situation was properly addressed with the appropriate people. Nico in particular, who we've talked about, wanted to make sure that Jack wasn't being taken advantage of. He was very protective over Jack, and I love the way that they went about things in a very respectful, very open way, even though he wasn't happy about it, but he grew to understand why things happened the way they were. And I think things played out appropriately in that regard. Another thing I really liked is that both Jack and Desmond are on the asexual spectrum, and so this is a book that doesn't actually have any sort of spicy scenes. So if you're looking for a book that doesn't really feature any like smut or sexy scenes, this is a book for you, because this doesn't have any of that. And I think this book is a perfect antidote to the people who think that you cannot write a good romance book without sex in it, because it did not feel any less romantic, did not feel any less loving, It didn't feel like it lacked a single thing, despite the fact that it had none of that. And it's not the first book I've read that doesn't have it. Sometimes when you talk to somebody about a book, they want to inquire straight away about the smut scenes in it. And I just want to say that that idea that a book has to feature sex scenes in order for it to be a good romance book is absolute bullshit. And this book is a perfect example. I loved how everything felt very gradual. I loved the relationship, not only the little family that they form with each other, but also Parker, who is Desmond's nephew. There was also this side plot of Desmond dealing with grief and also his nephew's grief and what that looks like and the complicated emotions that a child of that age would be dealing with, alongside his grandparents trying to take him and trying to manipulate him into not being with his uncle, who he loves very much. It was just a really sweet book. I read it in a day because that's kind of standard with JJ Mulder books, I think, and I just absolutely loved it. Now that JJ Mulder has featured 3 characters on the asexual spectrum in her books, I love the fact that they don't feel the same, because obviously it's a spectrum, so no 2 people on that spectrum will be the same. And I love the fact that all 3 of her ace characters feel distinctive to me. They don't feel the same. They actually took time to make sure that they represented what people can look like on different places on that spectrum. I think it's also the first time I've ever read a book about a character that was from Australia. If that sounds like a good time to you, I fully recommend that you pick it up. It is the last book of the series, and I definitely think it's probably one of the strongest. You can definitely see, I suppose, the improvement that JJ Mulder has made across the series, and I cannot wait to see what's coming next. The next book on my list is Out of the Storm by Logan Sage Adams. This features Gary and Jeff. So Jeff is a mall custodian and Gary is a part-time professor, part-time radio host. I do love the fact that this book had probably one of the best introductions that I've ever seen. Jeff is a storm chaser in his free time, which I think is a fantastic hobby. I didn't even think that people did that, to be honest. It's obviously something that he's doing not only because he enjoys it, but as a means to cope about something that has recently happened to him. Jeff listens to Gary on the radio and he obviously quite likes Gary, and then they meet and then they strike up a friendship. They're both dealing with different things. Jeff has been through something that's particularly traumatic that he not only finds it very difficult to talk about, because for one, for anybody who has been through that before, I would imagine it's a very, very difficult thing to talk about generally. And then when you consider that this is a historical at a time when it wouldn't have been very easy to seek help because homophobia was even worse than it is today, it makes it even more difficult, because how does he know who to trust? How does he know who to open up to? Where can he go to get help without fear? And I think he was at a point in his life where he was desperate to have a connection with someone, but couldn't really envision or see that future for himself, because he was still dealing with the trauma of everything that had happened to him. And he obviously was thinking to himself, well, if I let somebody in again, who's to say what happened? And then if it does happen, where will I go? My life already feels over as it is. And if it happens again, if I give somebody the opportunity to do this to me again, where will that leave me? Gary has abandonment issues from a certain aspect of his life and the way that he grew up. He's the kind of person that you would describe as too fast, too soon. He gets very easily attached to someone and then he wants to have a relationship maybe quicker than they're ready for. And this is something that has become quite clear to him as something that's quite off-putting. And so they meet, they strike up a friendship, they start hanging out, they share their hobbies with one another. And I think one of my favorite things about this book is that I do love what feels like a raw portrayal of something. And one of the things that upsets me about romance books that I had read in my early or late teens or years ago is that something traumatic happens to somebody and then all of a sudden they meet somebody, they fall in love, and it's nowhere to be found. But this thing that they're talking about, this thing that has happened to them, these experiences that they have are traumatic. They need professional help. They need to be properly acknowledged. And even if you're not getting professional help for it, you do need to talk about it. You do need to maybe come up with strategies to maintain your mental health, so to speak. And it always seemed like there was nothing there. Whereas with books like these, I really like the fact that there was a very start and stop quality to it, in the sense that they were trying to figure out this relationship coming from 2 different directions with 2 different life experiences. They would make progress and then they would hit a snag and it would take them back a little bit, but then they would always devise a way to make things easier. For a significant part of the book, it felt like their relationship was kind of like a right person, wrong time kind of thing, because it was like they were so perfectly well matched, but at the same time it was quite obvious that they had baggage to deal with, and until they dealt with that baggage, until they came up with, I suppose, methods to cope with what they had been through individually, they wouldn't progress. It kind of felt like how if two people in the world with those exact same problems decided to get into a relationship, it felt like how it would look like if I was privy to their relationship, if that makes any sense. Nothing was glossed over, nothing was glamorized. It was just like, this is where we are. And as desperate as we are to make something work, there are things in place that make it so that it's not, and until we address those things, there's nothing we can do about it. But I also loved how frank and raw it felt at times. My heart would just break, because especially with Jeff, his pain, I think, was so palpable, and I had to put down the book sometimes because the pain I felt for him was visceral at times, and I desperately wanted this man to catch a break. But then eventually they find their footing and things work out, and it's not perfect by any means, but they do devise ways in which to make each other comfortable. They get a relationship in which they are both satisfied, and they get to work towards making this relationship a healthy one. And at the end of it, all their efforts are not in vain. They get exactly what they wish for. It's not cookie cutter, it's not perfect, but it is perfect for them. It is an incredible book, and it's one of those books where I don't even know how I read it. I don't know how I came across it. It's not something that was recommended to me, so it was something that I found quite by chance. And I had this moment after I read it where I was like, I can't believe I discovered this book on my own. It's one of those books that makes you, I suppose, thankful for the privilege to be able to read, because it teaches you so much and it impacts your life in a way that you perhaps don't expect. And it's such good writing, especially for somebody that is essentially a new author. Logan Sage Adams, I don't really hear anybody talk about Logan Sage Adams, and I think that they really do need to, because despite the fact that this is clearly a new author, the level of research, the level of care, the level of the writing, the descriptions, everything is so quality. You just know that this person was meant to write, because wow, what an incredible book, especially for somebody that hasn't released very many books. It's one of those books that I had to probably sit down after reading it. If somebody has been through this, and this is a life that they could have, despite what they've been through and despite what they think that they deserve, and it's very clear to you that they deserve this good thing, but sometimes it's not the clearest thing to them. I just hope that people are able to find some kind of reprieve from their pain or whatever it is. I love this so much. Next, also by Logan Sage Adams, I think this was her debut novel, which again, wow, it's Our Own Light. It follows Floyd and Oliver. This is also a historical romance. Oliver comes from a very wealthy family. He is the only child, but his family, when you read about him, it's very obvious that the only reason why he was born was to continue the family legacy and the family business. His parents have absolutely no interest in him beyond what he can do for them and what he can do for their family name and their legacy. And he has run away to find a semblance of a life for himself, because I can imagine that if you are a child and those are the kind of parents that you have, it doesn't matter how much money you have, the emotional neglect is immense. And I cannot imagine being born for the sole purpose of furthering somebody's agenda. And also, he's the only child, so this was their one shot to have a relationship with a child, and they just didn't. And so he meets Floyd when he moves to Floyd's town, and Floyd is a miner. He's come from a very difficult background of his own. He was born in a mining town, and he didn't come from the most privileged of backgrounds. He was a miner as a child. That is how difficult of a background he has. And now he's still a miner, but now he lives with his best friend and their child. He has stepped up for his best friend because something terrible happens to her, and she has a child, and he decides that he will not have his best friend be ruined. He steps up and becomes her husband. He marries her, even though they don't have any romantic kind of element to their relationship, but they are truly best friends. And then he has finally found his footing, where he has an honest living, even though it's a dangerous one, and they have quite a comfortable life, and he's doing well for himself. And I think Oliver comes and they form like a really good friendship. They get to know one another. Oliver also gets to know Effie as well, and they become a found family with each other, and they're able to get this life that they all deserve. and that is unconventional and it's not picture perfect, but it is perfect for them and it's no less worthy. One of the things I really liked about this book is it talks about things like death and abandonment and emotional neglect and child labor. I don't think I've ever read a book about child labor before. And it talks about change because Oliver was keen on this relationship despite the time period and despite all the barriers to entry that he and Floyd faced to their relationship. But I did understand Floyd because Floyd is the kind of person where he's come from a difficult background. He's been able to make a life for himself, and even if it's not a perfect life, it's still a life. And he's a bit more resistant to change because of the fear of things going sideways and him going back to a place of instability. And that is something that they had to work through together. This book was incredible. It was incredibly written. If you've come from a difficult background, you have things to work through together in a relationship to make it healthy, to make it ideal for you both. And I love the fact that it felt like they did the work. You can't help but love Ollie because he's so quirky and everything, but I think he's also so eager to find some kind of acceptance somewhere, to find a home essentially, and he finds it in probably the most unlikely of places, but he does find what he's looking for at the end of the day. And also I really loved the relationship with Ollie's side of the family that he does find after moving as well. It was a very heartwarming book. You can tell the extreme level of care that goes into writing them. And so because of that, I think I have to be in a certain kind of emotional space to read their books because it does take a toll, but I feel like it's worth it. Because if you're looking for romance books with substance and you're looking for things that make you more aware of what life could look like outside of what you do know, then look no further, really. Love and Acceptance, I think, runs through every book that I've mentioned thus far. And it's not really something that I knew I was looking for until all my favorite books ended up having all these things, and I'm just like, so this is what I seek and this is what I like and this is what appeals to me. It was beautiful. I just love seeing the starts and the stops, the imperfections, the awkward moments. I think they make for a very well-rounded book. I think it's one of those books that I don't think I'll forget. I suppose it depends on the impact the book has on you, but I just think I'm unlikely to forget a book like this because it hit everything that I look for when I look for a romance. And I think more people need to read these books. And if you have read them, please tell me what you think. Next up we have And Then He Kissed Me by C.M. Daniels. And this book, again, just took my heart and tore it into a million pieces and built it back. This book deals with Tommy and Eric. This book is actually based in England, in London to be precise. And so Tommy comes from a very wealthy family. His family actually decides to exile him because they find out that he is gay. And so they make him live in Barking, where he's supposed to work, I suppose, in the admin side of like a factory. And he meets Tommy, who lives a very boring and unfulfilling life, stuck working in the factory because he doesn't really come from a very wealthy background himself. He basically took on the job so that he would be able to help his parents out financially. But what he has done by doing that is that he has abandoned his dream. Tommy is very bright. He's very academically inclined. He loves to read. And by him choosing to help his family out, he gave up his hope to go to university and study. He meets Eric, who comes and works there, and then they just get on. They go for a couple of drinks with Tommy's friends and they all just get along like a house on fire. I think with Eric, he doesn't come from a particularly loving family. Obviously, they are abundant in terms of material things and connections, but also he is gay, which means that he has lost those connections and he has basically been shunned by his very abusive parents. And he just really wants a place that he can belong. So when he goes to Barking, thinking that it's probably like the end of his life, he ends up meeting Tommy and his friends. And Tommy and his friends belong to the mod scene, which is something that I had never heard of prior to reading this book. Let me see if I can actually find a definition of what it is, because I found it to be so fascinating. So it says the term mod derives from modernist, a term used in the 1950s to describe modern jazz musicians and fans. That usage contrasted with the term trad, which described traditional jazz players and fans. The 1959 novel Absolute Beginners describes modernists as young modern jazz fans who dress up in sharp modern Italian clothes. The novel may be one of the earliest examples of the term being written to describe young British-style conscious modern jazz fans. The use of the word modernist should not be confused with modernism in the context of literature, art, design, and architecture. From the mid to late 1960s onwards, the mass media often used the term mod in a wider sense to describe anything that was believed to be popular, fashionable, or modern. Tommy and his friends belonged to this scene. They bond over music and fashion, and it was so lovely to see, because again, it's something that I had never heard of before, so it was like an entry point. And you know, I just love to find out something through a book. And then they would wear all these clothes and they would listen to all this music, and they would have like discussions about music and real artists. And I really love the fact that they addressed racism. One of Tommy's friends was black, or a couple of them are black, and they were discussing what their experience would be like in the world in 1915's Britain at the time. And they also talked about the kind of musicians, the black musicians in both the UK and the US, who would have had their work stolen from them, or would not have been properly credited for their bodies of work, their bodies of art, their music, their discographies, simply because they were black, and it would have been given and credited to their white counterparts. And that was very much a discussion in this book, which I really appreciated. The mod kind of subculture that they were all a part of felt very much alive. C.M. Daniels is very good at writing a place to the extent that it almost comes alive. And it happened when Tommy, Eric and their friends went to London. It also happened when Tommy and Eric went to Brighton, if I'm not mistaken. It was them experiencing the city together and in their own way. This is going to sound very woo-woo, but it's like it became a character in those places. And I thought it was really sweet. I really loved the discussion about Tommy going back to school and not feeling like he's letting anybody down as a result, because he has such a responsibility to his family. And I love the fact that he was allowed to discuss that he was disappointed and life was unfair to him at that point, but it doesn't mean that he should give up his dream. The dream might be coming late, but it's still a very valid dream, and there may be a way for him to pursue that dream. Maybe not exactly the way that he envisioned, but pursue that dream nonetheless. And I really love that topic, because I think it's something that I struggle with a little bit, and it's helpful to see that through somebody else's experience, I find, because I think it's easier for me to accept those kind of things because I'm able to see for other people. So you know, when you're able to have compassion for other people, but somehow it doesn't extend to yourself or like apply to yourself. So I think that when I read about characters like this and I can clearly see that it's something quite feasible for them, it makes me have even more compassion for myself, if that makes any sense. I don't even know if that makes any sense, but you get it. So I think that was kind of like the impact it had on me. The book happened at a time when being gay was illegal in the United Kingdom, and they had their fair share of the consequences of that and what it meant for their very real and very valid relationship that shouldn't be looked down on simply because they were two men. And I just absolutely loved it. I loved their friends. I loved the community that they built. I loved the discussions that took place. Again, this is a debut novel, which the fact that people even have debut novels of this caliber is wild to me. The next book is coming out very soon, which features Tommy's best friend, Mick. So Mick is who we meet first. So I had initially assumed that that was who Eric was going to end up with, but it's actually ended up being Tommy. His book is coming in March of this year, and I am so excited because I enjoyed the first one, and I think C.M. Daniels is an author that I will be actively looking for. My next book is actually two books, but I'm going to count them as one because it's kind of a series and they're interconnected. You can read them as standalones, but they are interconnected, and it's One Indulgence and One Glimpse by Lydia Gastrell. One Indulgence follows Henry Courtland and Lord Richard Avery. They're both gay men, and Henry is the Earl of Brenly, and he feels as though he has a responsibility to his family to get married and have children and continue on his family's legacy. But he also knows that he is a gay man and he has never been attracted to women. And so he organizes a night where he finally gets to sleep with a man because he wants to know what it feels like, and also because he is a very principled man. And he said that once he got married, he was not interested in ever being unfaithful to his wife. So he planned to get married and do his duty, but not ever step out of their marriage in order to because people will do that where they'll marry somebody and go outside and sleep with somebody else. He never wanted to cheat on his wife ever. But then he meets Lord Richard Avery, who is also part of the upper class society as well. But he actually has a group of friends who are like him in the sense that they like men. So they have some sort of arrangement and they all kind of sleep together or whatever, keep each other's secrets. And then he meets Richard, and it is probably the most amazing experience of both of their lives, because not only are they getting to sleep with their preferred gender, but they are also very much attuned to each other's needs. So Richard had a rough time because he is a very sentimental person, and he is a very expressive person in terms of love and feeling and softness. And my light has died. So the thing with Richard is that obviously, because of the time period and the ways in which men are socialized to kind of hide away from tender feelings or tender relations, especially with other men, he would often find himself in situations where he's sleeping with men, but he's not actually satisfied because he prefers things to be a bit more tender, a bit more loving, a bit more sentimental, and that's just not what he's getting with the people he's sleeping with. So when he then sleeps with Henry, and he's able to do those things without being shamed and without feeling restricted and feeling like they had time to do all that, and feeling like Henry was quite receptive to him taking things slow or being a little bit more touchy-feely or even like kissing, he found that with Henry, he was able to do everything that he wished and not feel bad about it, not have to apologize, not have to be ashamed. For Henry, it was an amazing experience because Richard is just a very loving man generally, and it was great to have that kind of person be his first and only experience. And then for Richard, it was great as well. So they end up not being able to stop thinking about one another, essentially. So they try and go about their business. Henry tries to find a wife, and unfortunately the person that he ends up being kind of matched with is Richard's sister, and he's not pleased for obvious reasons. For one, he wants to be with Henry, and he wants an opportunity to fall in love and have a really fulfilling relationship, no matter how difficult it would have been at the time. And Henry is trying to do his obligation as the only son of his father, who has to carry on the family name. And so the drama of this story really comes from Richard trying to convince Henry that being with him is the best option possible, and Henry trying to avoid Richard because he is a very dutiful son. I thought it was really sweet. I really enjoyed it. There were a lot of side characters I liked, but I especially liked Richard's aunt, who was really lovely, and he was able to confide in. His brother was horrendous. Neither of them had very good families, and the moments that they had together were very sweet because of the time and because they couldn't really be spotted together. They were very few and far between, which I kind of hated, but I understood. But overall, I did really enjoy the story. And I think if you like a historical romance that focuses on like British high society and two men who really have no business being together but can't seem to avoid being together, I would highly recommend. I really loved the fact that there was really no infidelity involved. I like the fact that they both seemed like really principled men who wanted to do right, not only by each other and by themselves, but also by the people that they were surrounded by. Next up, we have One Glimpse. So One Glimpse focuses on Sir Samuel Shaw and Lord John Darnish, and both of these men actually had appearances in the book before the first book. So Sam and Henry have a very complicated past because they were once in the same school and they liked each other, and Sam was very badly bullied because he was not your typical guy. He wasn't tall, he wasn't athletic, he didn't have that desirable physique. He was more so into the arts. He was extremely emotional. He's the kind of person that can attend a play and cry during it because he feels so much, and he's born into a world that is quite frankly not ready for any of that and not ready to accept a man that deviates from what they feel a man should be. And so he meets Henry at school, and Henry is really kind to him and they like each other, but Henry isn't at a place where he is able to accept that he liked Sam. He knew that he liked Sam, but I think for him, he just couldn't get past the barriers. And as a result, he ended up really hurting Sam, and it's something that Sam has been holding on to, not only because it really hurt and it contributed to a lot of trauma from his childhood, but I think also because in society where he exists as an adult man, he's still not accepted, and he feels very much still kind of ostracized despite being a man from a well-to-do background. He's very wealthy as well. I forgot what he did for a job, but I did remember it was mentioned that he made a lot of money, but still he was not seen the same way that Henry was, and it's an insecurity that was a constant source of, I suppose, injury for him. And so he's still holding on to a lot of resentment. A lot of that resentment is actually projected outwards. So it makes people not really want to be close to him. And then you have John, who also runs in the same circles, but is also kind of ostracized on his own because he has a mistress and a child, and that's not really seen as the thing to do. As a man of that particular standing, he is supposed to get married and have a child, but he's taking on this mistress. But he's not actually romantically involved with this woman, and the reason why he is actually quite noble and sweet and kind. And it's a burden that I think not many people would undertake, but he did because he's just that way inclined. And then he meets Sam and they get along, and their relationship is quite turbulent at times because Sam, he's very insecure, and I suppose it's very difficult for somebody in this mindset that Sam is to accept love and to accept that somebody like John, who again, he's tall, he's handsome, all those kind of things, has an interest in him. But as it turns out, John, even though he looks the part of what society thinks an ideal man should look like, he doesn't actually feel it. He feels more like Sam. So he's basically a combination of Sam and Henry in the sense that he kind of has Sam's sensibilities, and he doesn't feel very macho, and he doesn't really connect with like sports and all those things. But he does it for show just to fit in. But then he looks like Henry. He looks like the kind of man that is accepted. So he is accepted by society, but he feels like he's acting all the time, and he's wearing like a version of himself that is not authentic and that is not true. So they really bond over that. They undoubtedly hurt each other sometimes, but eventually they do come to a place where they find an understanding. It was very heartbreaking, and I feel like if you did read the story, you could be quite inclined to be really harsh on Sam until you understand the backstory. At first I was like, Sam, come on, let it go. But then I got to the point where I read what had happened to him, and I was like, if I was in his shoes, who is to say that I wouldn't react like this? And I think part of my judgment definitely came down after understanding the backstory. And I loved when he hashed it out with Henry. It was really heartwarming and heartbreaking in many ways. It was also really funny, especially when Richard and John were involved and they saw the bond that existed between the guys. And I just really loved the fact that they were able to reach a resolution. It was not like a straight road, but at the end of the day, they were able to come to a sort of arrangement that served them both. And it was just really lovely to see. The last book on my list, last but certainly not the least, is After Hours at Dooryard Books by Sebastian. And if you have followed me for even a little bit, you know that Sebastian currently holds the place of my favorite author. I have read her entire catalogue. I am obsessed. She ruined me for other authors. So this book follows Patrick and Nathaniel. Patrick lives in New York City. He runs a bookstore, and one day the owner of the bookstore brings in this guy called Nathaniel, who is clearly in need of everything. He clearly doesn't have very much money on him. He is clearly in need of a home, a job, and seems very shaken, seems very untethered, I suppose. The owner of the bookstore has a habit of finding men, women who need help, like on the streets in New York, and then bringing them to a place where they get back on their feet and then eventually letting them go. So this wasn't like a new thing, and it wasn't shocking to Patrick that the owner of the store would do this. It was quite normal, except this time it's somebody that he fell in love with. In the midst of him getting him situated and showing him this new life, Patrick learns that his brother has been killed in the war, and his sister-in-law, who is also his best friend, comes to New York because obviously she's just lost her husband and they have a new baby. She actually comes to them when the baby is a week old, and they just embark on this journey of running this bookstore and helping her with her baby. She was obviously devastated. There's just this found family that they form, not only between Patrick and Nathaniel and Patrick's sister-in-law and her baby, but with their neighbors as well. Sebastian, her ability to create these families out of characters that do not exist needs to be studied. She is phenomenal at this. I think it's a story that explores different kinds of grief. I think also it explores how much heavier grief can feel when you're not talking about it, or when you're carrying secrets that you don't necessarily feel like you can talk about. I really love the fact that they just jumped into helping this baby. Nathaniel, despite being quite reticent and withdrawn, as soon as he saw the baby, he fell in love with her and would take care of her. And when you learn about his backstory, you understand why he did that, and it's even more heartbreaking to have the additional context. But I think it also makes it all the more beautiful and precious, the bond that he ends up sharing with Susan. They bond over music and they bond over books, and there's just something about reading about people who love books whilst loving books yourself that will always be extremely gratifying. I love the fact that they had other side characters who were interesting. Sebastian is also really good at creating side characters who interest you, that you want to know more of. They had this revolving door of friends that would come over, and then they would like exchange a meal together. The bookstore became a home away from home of sorts for all kinds of people. I loved when it talks about the steady steps that you take in your path to healing after a particularly traumatic event. I love the fact that it was just so slow and so steady and so understanding and so well written as well. The characters felt extremely layered and not at all like one-dimensional. What their motivations were, how they came to be the people that they came to be. He was actually helped by Mrs. Kaplan when he needed a place to stay, so he's driven to help other people based on the fact that when he was most in need, he also was helped. Nathaniel is extremely sweet, but also just dealing with the harms that he may have unknowingly contributed to by the job that he had. It wouldn't be Sebastian if she didn't write a book based in New York, in which New York was an actual character. Obviously, New York is where they lived, but I think Sebastian has a way of writing New York in a way that I don't think I've ever seen. I don't know if she's from New York. I don't know if she lives in New York. I don't know if she has any connection to New York. But what I do know is that she writes New York in a way that I've never seen anybody write New York. It feels like she loves New York, and New York comes alive in her work. I don't know how to explain it other than that. And if you've read a Sebastian book based in New York, so you should be so lucky. We could be so good. Danielle Cabot puts down roots. This book, I just think that she writes New York like she loves it so much, and it shows. I really loved the revolving cast of other gay characters. I talked about how their bookstore became like a home away from home for people, where they could come and have a coffee or tea or have pastries. And I think I loved the fact that it became like a sort of haven for other gay people who also knew them. The world is a harsh place, and I really love that feeling of having a sanctuary for people who just don't have it for whatever reason, and that very much featured in this book. My reading journey has been forever changed by Sebastian. I don't know where I would be had I not discovered her writing, but I can say that my life is all the richer because of it. There's certain books I've read in life where after I've read them, I felt like a better person, because I feel like it has unlocked an even greater level of compassion within me, or knowledge, or even shut away ignorance. Sebastian is one of those authors. Every time I read a book, I learn about something, or I see a portrayal of something that I didn't even know that I needed to see portrayed, and it changes me, I think, for the better. If there's any author that has done that for you, let me know. Is that crazy? Like, do I need help? If you do anything after watching this video, please pick up a Sebastian book. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you stayed this long, I appreciate you. I've had quite a few subscribers since the last time I posted a long form video, and I would just like to thank you for subscribing to the channel, for giving me a chance, for all your interaction, for all your comments. But let me know what you would like to see in the new year content wise from me. If you would like me to do a Q&A, whatever you want to see, wherever I can improve, wherever you have feedback, just let me know. And if you're not very comfortable expressing yourself, you can just leave me an emoji below. I'm fine with that, because it did take me a while before I was comfortable commenting anything on anybody's videos ever. So I understand why you might be a bit apprehensive. I'm hoping to do a video about my least favorite books of the year. I don't know how that's going to go down, because I am a chronic DNFer, which means that if I don't like a book, I DNF. It will be interesting to do a list about least favorite books, when most of the time the books I tend to stick with are books I like. I'm hoping to pull that together very soon. I don't know if I will do this, but I'm just going to throw the idea out there. I wanted to see if I could do all my favorite characters I discovered last year, maybe. Let me know if you're interested in seeing that. Thank you very much. Please like, please comment, please subscribe, as it helps my channel grow. And I'll see you when I see you. Bye bye.